Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. This is a continuation of my Western Core series. Today we're going to be talking about Shakespeare's immortal tragedy, Hamlet. I have here the old Pelican version. The new ones have the really nice cover art. The only one in that update of the series I have is of the sonnets, which I really wanted to add the sonnets to this, but I felt like I didn't want this series to grow too large. And I'm really trying to get these videos a little shorter, but there's just so much to say about these core books of Western literature that it's difficult. Nonetheless, Hamlet may just be the center or the apex of it all, which is amazing. I keep coming back to this play time and time again. So now we have a transition from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales to Hamlet, Shakespeare. This is right in the realm of Cervantes and Don Quixote. And I debated on which one to do first. They're contemporaries. There are no records of them actually communicating with each other. But surely Cervantes and Shakespeare knew of one another, given their passion for and connection to theater around the same time. And also it's well known and very interesting that the two of them died in the same month of the same year. Some kind of divine connection or something. Anyway, there are traces of Chaucer's Wife of Bath in this play, especially in terms of humanism and individualism and self-reliance. Like I said in the Chaucer video, these are sort of the seeds of what would become American transcendentalism, or what would Ralph Waldo Emerson called self-reliance. One of the most famous quotes from this comes from Polonius to his son Laertes, and he says, "This above all, to thine own self be true." What's so great about this play and makes it still a joy to read and makes it still feel modern, even though it was written right at the beginning of the 17th century, is that it has a ghost. It's a mystery. It's got forbidden love. It's got this overwhelming existential crisis. It has murder and adultery. It has regicide. It has glimpses and musings on the afterlife and purgatory. It has suicide. It has revenge plots. And it has unrequited love, which is always universal. Some of the books that I've read on Shakespeare and on Hamlet aren't very many, actually. I spend more time reading the plays and the poems themselves rather than reading about them so much, especially in my Norton Shakespeare, which I love. David Crystal, Think on My Words, Exploring Shakespeare's Language. Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, Harold Bloom. Poem Unlimited, Harold Bloom. And then, of course, my trusty modern interpretations of Hamlet. This is such a great series. The pieces on each of the texts are very well selected. So let's go through some advertisements. Unfortunately, I cannot find my copy of Stephen Greenblatt's Hamlet in Purgatory. It's somewhere in these shelves, but I searched and searched for it. I can't find it. In his preface, he says, "But what they," meaning the audience members of the first Hamlet performance, "what they saw at the Globe was an unprecedented explosion of power." From Hamlet, Poem Unlimited by Harold Bloom. Hamlet becomes the freest artist of himself in all literature. Hamlet is too large for tragedy, for his own self, and weirdly too titanic for imaginative literature. We want Hamlet to tell us much more than he does, because his power over language is so enormous. And this could not be more true. Every time I read this, I savor more and more slowly all of Hamlet's lines. Lifetime reading plan, Clifton Fadiman. Even if you are not looking for anything in Shakespeare, you will find something. As Longinus says in his essay on the Sublime, man can easily understand what is useful or necessary, but he admires what passes his understanding. And when it comes to Hamlet, indeed, the character Hamlet, though he's brooding and moody and melancholy, and dressed in black and sulking and so on, he does draw us out of ourselves, which is the whole point of sublime literature. We tend to marvel Hamlet the way that he himself marvels the skull of Yorick. And he refers to Yorick as a man of infinite jest. And even 400 years later almost, David Foster Wallace, in his magnum opus, Infinite Jest, he took that line from that moment. And in that moment with the gravedigger, the clown as he's called, and Yorick's skull and Hamlet, we realize that Yorick is actually the one who was a father figure to Hamlet the whole time. To pull us outside of ourselves, Shakespeare, or Hamlet, as his voice piece or surrogate maybe in the play, has to draw us into a realm of things we don't understand. For example, at the very beginning we have the ghost, this elusive figure of the slain king. Just this glimpse of an afterlife, and the notion of purgatory in the text hints at and draws our attention toward something beyond. And in fact, Hamlet himself says to Horatio in these famous lines, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." And some of these things include the question of suffering, justified suicide, and the afterlife, all of which the play takes head on. In terms of aesthetics, I'm not sure in the English language if it can get any better than Shakespeare. I still remember some of the expressions from the sonnets that I read even many, many years ago, such as, "When 40 winter's nights hath besieged thy brow," to denote, old age, 40 years old, and so on. "A tattered weed of small worth held." Just these beautiful, striking locutions. And sure enough, early on, we get this, just to talk about the morning. We go from Homer's well-known epithet of rosy-fingered dawn to something like this in Shakespeare. "But look, the morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high eastward hill." The morn in russet mantle clad. Beautiful. Rosy-fingered dawn in Shakespeare is in russet mantle clad. The ghost can also be seen as a sort of blurring of perception and reality, a muddying of what Hamlet insists what is. What seems is what is, and what is what seems. And Hamlet insists on knowing only what is. Yet he also admits to a form of solipsism when he tells Rosencrantz, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." Here also we come to another of the most famous lines in Hamlet. And this actually comes from the folio only, and is not in this edition of Hamlet, Q2. And it says, he's talking to Rosencrantz again, and he says, "Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams." That's probably the most sublime line in the entire play, and has presented a handful of very intriguing interpretations. Concomitant with his grief of his father's death and an uncle who has usurped the throne and the marriage bed, is the urge for Hamlet to purge himself of all human knowledge, thus preparing himself for both revenge and the possibility of his own death. Anguish tends to give way towards nihilism, interestingly tempered by a Christian doctrine of suicide being a sin that precludes a satisfactory afterlife. So amusingly, in one passage, Hamlet refers to his head as a globe. And we have to remember that the name of the theater in which this was performed was the Globe. So in this moment, when he's referring to his head as a globe, he is bringing the audience into his world, into his globe, the globe into the globe, if you will. We see that he says, "Yea, from the table of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all pressures past, that youth and observation copied there, and thy commandment all along shall live," his father's commandment, "within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter." So this is a cry for a tabula rasa, smoothed away, erased out, and imprinted only with revenge. So it is the commingling of tragedy and existential anguish and the suffering of being trapped within one's own mind, unable to reach outward toward a greater reality, mixed with high artistic capability and beautiful language that makes this play as powerful and glorious as it is. A key feature of the play and transition for Hamlet is that as he begins to understand what he must do, his suicidal melancholy is tempered by a sense of purpose, as he tells Rosencrantz, "What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but sleep and feed a beast no more?" Hamlet bids Horatio to allow him, Hamlet, to live on through the telling of his story, a common impulse, vita brevis ars longa, of Hippocrates. I haven't memorized it in the original Greek, but in the Latin, life is short, vita brevis, art is long, ars longa. If we look through some of my notes, we see that this begins in darkness, thus setting a mood in much the same way we'll see down the road with Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. It also, the very first spoken line in the play is, "Who's there?" And as someone pointed out a while ago, I can't remember who it was, the first two words in David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest is, "I am." So it's almost like David Foster Wallace is picking up from the beginning of Hamlet. And I love the next line when he says, "Stand and unfold yourself." This is a Shakespearean idiom for revealing one's identity. And I've appropriated it into my everyday speech, which causes all manner of puzzled faces. In some of the first lines of Hamlet's with the new king, his uncle, and the queen, Gertrude, the queen is perplexed at why Hamlet is taking things so difficultly. She says, "All that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity." And then Hamlet says, "Aye, madam, it is common." And we can hear this resigned, "Yes, yes, I know." And she says, "Well, if it be, why seems it so particular with thee?" And in fact, it is something that everyone recognizes, just as Ovid established, 1600 years earlier. And no doubt, reading through this and other works of Shakespeare, Shakespeare was well acquainted with Ovid and with the Geneva Bible. And things are constantly in flux, constantly in change, but even we moderns or contemporaries, we don't like to accept that, and neither does Hamlet. Laertes offers a great line that sums up why we read great books like this. He says, "The inward service of the mind and soul grows wide withal." Hamlet allows our inward mind and soul to grow. Hamlet sees his life as little worth. He says, "Why? What should be the fear? I do not set my life at a pin's fee." In the end, suffice it to say that even though this is a very moody book, it is taking on the big questions of life and death and so on, and whether suicide is justified. But by the end, you get a sense that Hamlet is only obliquely toying with the thought of suicide. He's just in this transition of trying to figure out why death closes all, and what gives meaning to a life that is just going to come to an end. Even the revenge plot seems to be subservient to that, or relegated in the background of that, and serves only as a plot device. Every read of Hamlet yields more insight into the human psyche and just how alive the character of Hamlet really is and was. It's no wonder that this production captured the minds and heart of so many and continues to down to our day. Shakespeare, with this play and poems among many others, would set a precedent that his successors would stand in awe of and try to overcome, or at least match, down to this day. From Milton to Melville, we will see this struggle, this competition with Shakespeare and greatness. Despite all of its lofty heights and goals and themes and its melancholy, it has a comedic edge as well. There are lots of funny moments. Hamlet can constantly don the role of a depressive and then all of a sudden turn into a comedian with these pithy, hilarious lines. He's sort of all over the place, jumping from here to there, and you know, his consciousness is very wide. It's wider than ours, and indeed it acts as a singularity, where we can tip over the edge and get pulled apart into spaghetti. But unlike a real black hole, once you come out of this, you can fit the pieces together again and notice that your consciousness has become a little larger. That's it for Hamlet. That's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and next we will be reading Don Quixote of Cervantes.